Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for New Leader Lasting Transition, Making Culture Work at the FHCCP. My name is Karen Luce. I'm in charge of Learning and Development here at Denison Consulting, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. We're very excited to have your host, Brian Adkins, President of Denison Consulting, and Cindy Stewart, the President and CEO of the Family Health Council of Central Pennsylvania, here with us today. This is our final installment of our leadership-focused webinars. Before we get started, I wanted to go over just a couple of technical things with you. Cindy's going to present today for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to use the remainder of our time for some questions and answers sent in by you. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a control panel that you can use to send in your questions. Please feel free to send in your questions throughout the presentation rather than waiting for the end. That gives us enough time to organize them and really make the most of that question and answer session. We'll try to get through as many of the questions as we can, and we do apologize if we don't get to your specific question, but we'll make every effort to follow up with you after the webinar. I also want to let everyone know that a copy of today's webinar and a PDF version of the slides will be archived on our website, so if you'd like to access them again, you're welcome to. And we will email all of you once it's up there, so you will know where you can access it. And with that, I would like to introduce you to Brian Adkins, President of Denison Consulting.
Thanks, Karen, and I'd also like to extend my welcome to all of you joining us today. In our first webinar of 2010, I spoke about our efforts to focus on client solutions and how our model and tools can support leaders and managers as they strive to create greater alignment and clarity in their organizations, their business units, their teams. And in recent months, we've talked about solutions in a number of areas, such as mergers and acquisitions, turnarounds and transformations, talent management. Today we have a case that's going to speak to two of the solution areas that we often get involved with. Leadership transitions, so new leaders coming into an organization or being promoted up through an organization, and culture transformation, an organization that needs to make some dramatic shifts in their culture. And I'd like to start with the conversation in the area of leadership transitions. And to do that, I'm going to take you back to the year 1999. And as many of you will recall, we were concerned and worried about Y2K and the impact that that might have on our technology systems. We were also seeing the Dow Jones Industrial Average reach 11,000 for the first time, and many of us are hoping that we'll see it reach 11,000 again in our lifetime. And it was also in 1999 that the euro became the currency used by, at that time, 11 different European countries. And in case you may have missed it, 1999 was also the year that our guest today, Cindy Stewart, became the President and CEO of the Family Health Council and started a leadership transformation, a leadership transition rather, and a cultural transformation effort that I know that you're really going to enjoy hearing about. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you to Cindy Stewart and welcome Cindy. And perhaps, Cindy, you can start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and about the Family Health Council.
Thank you so much, Brian. And it really is a delight for me to be here with all of you, virtual as it is, but still a really interesting experience for me. It's one of my first times doing a webinar like this, so thank you for joining us. I guess I'll start by just telling you, set the stage a little bit for my coming to the Family Health Council, which in 1999 hardly seems new anymore. But the memories are still rather clear because I took over for someone who had been the Chief Executive Officer for 20 years, really since the inception of the Council. So you can imagine that following that kind of leader who was highly regarded and left in his wake a strong organization by most measures, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But let me talk, my experience before I came to the Council was in not-for-profit work. I had run smaller community-based organizations, so first time that I was really moving to more of a regional type of service delivery model. But the Family Health Council, and let me talk a little bit also about not-for-profit. Not-for-profit, in some respects, people get a little confused with, I'm not allowed to make money. And that is so not the truth. I need to make money. And in fact, with the way that government funding is going in the states these days, it's imperative that I'm making money and looking at the delivery of my services from a business approach. So the only thing that really defines a not-for-profit as distinct from a more corporate profit model is that we do have a volunteer board of directors. We're prohibited from loaning money, so I can't loan money to executives or officers, board members, and also I cannot have any distribution of my profit. It all needs to go back into the service delivery. So I think as we go through this model and some of the lessons that I've learned and utilized along the way, I'm hoping that you can really see that even though I'm a not-for-profit corporation, some of the distinctions are really pretty small in terms of how I may differ from the organization that you run.
Excellent. And, I know when leaders join a new organization, they typically get a fair amount of information, feedback, insights about beliefs and assumptions, if you will, about that particular organization. They hear from that board of directors that you mentioned. They hear from staff. They may hear from some of the customers of the organization. So new leaders are often getting a lot of feedback about people's perceptions of that organization. And I thought perhaps you might be able to share with us some of the beliefs and assumptions about the Family Health Council that you had and that were shared with you by others as you were coming into that role.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that, Brian. I think before I kind of start down that path, to just offer a distinction around who are the customers of Family Health Council of Central Pennsylvania. Well, probably first and foremost are the people that give us money. I mean, we receive money from public sources, and we then take that money and distribute it out over our 25-county geography in Pennsylvania through the use of subcontractors. So for me, when I came in, it was clear that that customer definition had really started to deteriorate. In fact, many folks had lost sight of the fact as to who the customers were, and not the least important certainly is the end user of all the services that we provide. So coming in and kind of hearing from, at that point in time, mostly the group that was charged with my recruitment, and it was clear that the board had some ideas about what was happening in the environment of Family Health Council of Central Pennsylvania. So you can see the list here of the types of things that we had as indicators that things weren't all as perfect as may have seemed. So that's the context in which I was hired. But then I come in, and one of the first activities that I undertook was to talk with the staff and find out a little bit from them how they perceived their work environment, the work that they did, how they looked at customers. And it was clear to me that I was in a position where I had some mismatch between what my board of directors and some of my customers was saying related to their view of Family Health Council and what my staff was saying as it related to their beliefs. So Brian and I have had an opportunity to work together in the past, and he has always been a valued resource for me. So he was probably one of the first phone calls I made to say, wow, how do you even begin to bridge this kind of disconnect between the folks who are most affected by our programs and the people that are charged with the responsibility of delivering them? And it was at that point in time that he suggested that the culture survey could be a great tool to bridge that gap. And here's how we really began, is first to take the survey to the staff and say, if you look at the 12 segments of our culture that we want to measure, would you all agree that these are areas that we would want to aspire to in order to be that high-performing, continue to be this highly functioning, to to determine exactly what our starting point was. And when staff were, they looked at the segments, and I know we're going to share that with you here in a minute, but as they looked at them, they're like, absolutely, this is where we probably are already. And that set the stage for me to be able to then use the instrument as a way to at least get staff to face the reality of what really might be happening within their culture.
And I think that's a great insight to share with people, in that very often people look at us, look at Denison, and think about a cultural assessment or a leadership assessment, and forget sometimes that those assessments are based on a model that says this is what high-performance organizations and high-performance leaders do. And I've often said that the clients who often get the most value out of the work that we do are the clients who first look at the model and try to understand the model and say, yes, these are characteristics of an organization that we aspire to, that we think would be important to help us do what we do as an organization. So I do think that was a critical and important first step. And I know that capturing the perceptions of a variety of constituents is important for new leaders as they take over an organization. One of the things that we've certainly seen through the years at Denison is just how valuable getting some culture data among the various data points that are being gathered can be. So without any more hesitation, let's take a look at the culture as expressed by the employees that existed at the Family Health Council and that was inherited by Cindy. And so here's the initial result that Cindy was presented with. I had the pleasure, if you will, of sharing these results with Cindy and taking her through the profile. I subsequently also had an opportunity to share these results with employees throughout her organization. And one of the things that I will share is that I thought the employees had an interesting perspective, which was that, well, wouldn't you expect to see a result like this when we've just lost our leader of 20-plus years in the organization, which again struck me as kind of an interesting perspective, that people would necessarily associate the culture and the strength of the culture, the clarity in the culture, with a leader as opposed to something that they potentially owned and had some responsibility for. But Cindy, I'll let you share a few thoughts about your initial reactions and how that data helped shape your leadership agenda in the early days of your tenure.
Thanks, Brian. Well, if any of you on the phone have been through the culture survey process, I'm sure that if you received results like this, your first reaction might have been to gulp and pick yourself up off the floor. And for me, as the leader who's trying to transition this group of people to high performance, I'm almost like, woohoo, because I had the clear evidence I needed to go to them and with Brian's help them really embrace and understand that they had performed great things in the last 20 years, but they were really in a maintenance mode. And in order to move forward and be competitive and to stay relevant, and in the not-for-profit world, that is so critically important for you to be able to convince your funders that you have a relevant service that they need to purchase. There was a lot of work to be done. And I think that the results, at first, I think like Brian said, they were mad. They wanted to offer excuses and reasons, but they're a great group of people and extremely committed. And so very quickly we were able to move them to, okay, so what do we do now? What are the next steps? I mean, they had already bought into the fact that they wanted to do better. So now I was able to start sharing some of my key messages, but they were being heard, and they were being heard not from a defensive position, but from a, we want to join with you and turn this organization around. So some of the key things that I was saying to them, mostly I want to just talk a little bit about the mission, if I can, in that the mission was very focused on the end user. And in the reality of our business, where we're receiving money and then distributing it back out to organizations where we support them in the service to the client, I had no direct touch. So it was clear to me that the customer confusion was really resulting from the fact that we were trying to have impact on a customer that we weren't even seeing day to day, being able to meet their needs in any substantive way. That was also an eye-opener for my board of directors, who in a not-for-profit environment has real key responsibility in setting the mission for the organization. But along with that then is helping them to understand that the program silos really needed to be broken down. We were organized by program, and literally I could have one program that was close to utter failure and one that may have been succeeding, and nobody even cared. I mean, if my program was doing well, it didn't really impact on me that my colleague across the hallway was close to disaster with the program that they were managing. And so, you know, again, the good news for me is that the key messages could be heard, and that really we could begin to start to have an impact with staff around what we wanted to do, what were the next steps that we wanted to take.
And so speaking about next steps, we'd like to, and I'm going to ask my colleague Rossi to help us out here, we'd like to launch a quick poll for those of you who are attending today, and simply ask you that if you were the new CEO or a consultant working with the CEO of this organization, and you had to decide where you wanted to start to make some improvements in the organization from a culture perspective, where indeed would you start? Would you start with the mission area, the adaptability area, involvement, consistency? Just some very quick general reactions and thoughts from all of you about where you would start this process. And you know, I recognize that when an organization has results that are as relatively weak as the ones that we're seeing in front of us, you know, that's a really difficult question to answer for a lot of people, is where do we start? But I think we have some pretty clear indication from people what they think. And it looks like about 84% of our respondents said that they would start in the mission area. And then we've got about 8% for adaptability, 8% involvement. And interestingly enough, nobody wants to start with consistency. I guess they don't want to build any more consistency around the culture that's in place that's shown here today. So we'll let, rather than keep you in suspense any longer, we'll let Cindy talk about where she started.
Well, thanks, Brian. Well, you guys are great, because my first question to Brian was, where the heck do I start? And, you know, and he answered, as many of you did, you start with mission. And the reason for that is that if you start with mission, it is the area where it probably has the strongest influence on the other areas. So by being able to clearly articulate what our vision was, what our strategy was our goals and objectives, you know, Brian said, accomplish nothing else, and that alone will move the other areas outward because you've been clear there. But I want to touch on something really important. Even though I said before that our mission was somewhat out of step with our reality, just having our board adopt a new mission would have not served to strengthen our culture areas there. What really has to happen with mission is that you have to be able to help the staff see where their day-to-day work, you know, showing up here at 8 o'clock in the morning, that when they drive home at night, they have had some impact on that vision, that strategy, those goals, those objectives. So again, I need to emphasize it isn't just about let's make sure the mission is in step with what we do, critically important. But if the staff can't see where their contribution is also in step with the mission and what we do, it isn't going to move your culture thermometer in any positive direction. But in addition to mission, again, great place to start, but we also had to start looking at how can we better reflect the customer in our programming. When I had program silos, I had different approaches to our customers depending on what the program. And when you have multiple programs, located within the same community-based provider, they can get pretty confused pretty quickly if it's up to everybody's individual opinion about what customer service means. So we had to begin to say, look, let's get the customer confusion out of this and start coming to our customer with much more of a consistent approach. We also had to, I had to remove layers. I'm a small organization. I have less than 100 employees. And at the time I took over, because it was so hierarchical in nature, the only way to advance yourself was, there were two key ways. You could take on the supervision of personnel, and you could take on a program with more complexity. So I had layers where I had one person supervising one person, because that was, again, as I said, the only way to advance. So we had to get rid of those layers. We had to make teams really become the highlight of how work was accomplished, and be able to have people advance through our salary administration clearly by taking on more knowledge, by being committed to the team environment. You can see there then that there were other things that we had to identify around. We moved from task lists to process owners. We began to use project management tools. One of the first not-for-profits that I am aware of that really used project management, really a technology stalwart in terms of how you can take complex projects and get them implemented. We were doing the same thing. So first time we really went to project management tools to control how we manage change. And then lastly, we had to embrace that continuous quality improvement was an entire organization responsibility, not just driven by what a particular funding source might want, but a commitment, a proactive commitment that we had to improve the quality of our program. So again, a lot of key activities, low-hanging fruit. I told Brian when we first started, I guess that's one advantage of a culture survey result that has you being able to move in a lot of directions. But I think the message for me as a leader that was trying to transition the organization was start with mission, but also see the easy areas in the other parts of the circle that you could concentrate on.
And I'll just add a couple of key points to that and reinforce a couple of things here. We talk about starting with mission. I often say to people that all of the 4 key cultural traits represented in the Denison model are important because they all impact performance in different ways. But we often describe mission as sort of first among equals, that getting clear about where you're trying to go helps you then think about questions like, what are we teaming around? What kind of skills do we need in the organization? What is it that we need people to coordinate their efforts around? But I do think it's important to note that in your case, Cindy, you were not afraid to take actions that impacted all 4 quadrants or traits in the culture model. Sometimes groups get very focused and want to stick in a particular area, and one of the things that our research has suggested time and time again, and in fact I'll put a quick plug in here for one of our most recent research notes that you can find on our website. It's called Balanced Profile, Better Organizations. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is because that our research shows that balance is really important, that you need a mission that is relevant to the marketplace, to the customers, to the people that you serve. You need to be adaptive, but you need to do that within the context of having a clear mission, et cetera. So I thought it was great that we emphasized starting with mission, but also recognized that there was a lot of work being done to build capabilities in those other areas as well. And at this point, I'd like to invite, and Rossi can help us again here, to launch one more poll. When you think about how long it takes to transform an organization, to make dramatic shifts in the culture of an organization, I'm sure we've all heard different comments about this. What do you think is the general time frame that people should expect when it comes to making transformative changes in a culture? And I'll give folks just a couple of seconds to respond to that one. And obviously there are a number of factors that can play into that with respect to size of the organization, the leadership and leadership support in the organization, and the kinds of systems, et cetera, that you put into place to support those culture changes. But let's see what our friends in the audience are suggesting. And so it looks like about 42% are saying 3 years to make some kind of transformative change. And then the rest of you are kind of split between the 2-year and 5-year mark, with just a few people saying 7 years or perhaps even longer. So the 3 years was kind of the winner on this one. Well, let's take a look. Just to give you the chance to see the profiles, you've already saw the profile on the left, which was the data collected for the Family Health Council in 1999. The profile that you see here on the right was the next set of data collected, and I think, by most people's perspective and perceptions, particularly any of you who are familiar with the Denison model, will know that profile you see on the right-hand side does reflect quite a bit of change. And in this case, this was about 2 years later. So about a quarter of the folks out there were right on target in terms of saying, 2 years. And as I said, there's lots of different variations or variables that can come into play here that can affect how long it can take to change an organization. The profile that you see on the right represents a lot of hard work and effort. It's always nice when you see sort of 2 points in time, but it doesn't, I don't think, fully capture the amount of work and effort that took place in between those 2 years in time. And a lot of hard work and effort on your part, Cindy, on the part of the employees at Family Health Council. So at this point, I thought maybe you could share with us some insights, some lessons that you learned that might help some people in our audience to inform some of their culture shift or transformation efforts in their organization, their unit, their work group, et cetera.
Thanks, Brian. I like what you said about the fact that there's probably a lot of factors that can influence whether it's 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And I heard you mention size. I heard you mention leadership. I mean, if I had to choose one singular factor, to me, it would be the buy-in of your leadership. Now, I was there hook, line, and sinker. I mean, as the new CEO, I needed to really latch on to a concept that would give me, I guess, the evidence, and that's what I've always liked about the culture survey. It's data that is hard to argue with, to be able to start moving the staff. I don't think size matters that much. I think it can get a little more complex, and everybody needs to be certainly marching to the same set of message points. But if you do not have the person engaged at the very top, I think this could take an incredibly long time. And so as I kind of share some of my thoughts around how we were able to shift this culture, one that's not on the slide that I'm going to start with is the ability of your leader. And in this case, I had such tremendous support from my executive team who clearly could see and buy into the need to start making these changes, because people are watching. They are watching to see, is this just something that you're putting, words out there? Is it the latest company message? Or are you a leader that really embraces the type of culture that you want to shift to? So I want to start with what I think is really important in terms of the staff impact. When you're going to make a huge transition as a new leader, one of the things you have to be very clear about is you're not going to have 100% of your staff come with you. It was probably one of the first questions that I was asked as part of my recruitment, and it was posed, I remember, something like this. We have excellent staff. They all work very hard. They do great jobs. How many of them do you want to retain going forward? And I really, the implication in that to me, I think from this group of people was, we want to keep them all. And yet, as you can see from what I've put here as guidance, I mean, right away, you're going to have 20% who they're just waiting for that new leader. I mean, they didn't like the other guy. Who knows? They weren't getting quite the attention they wanted. They knew new strategies had to be embraced. But they're going to come in, and they're going to hear your message, and they are going to be right there with you from the start. But then you have 20% who are just the opposite. Now the transition represents a loss of power to them. It's clear that there's going to be expectations around culture that are very different from what they signed on for. They're not going to be rewarded for some key areas that they had been before, and you need to make it easy for them to go. And you can certainly start talking from the very start around the importance of matching your skills with your work environment, understanding this is just one way to work, it's not the way to work, all of those kinds of things that can let people gracefully exit and not lose respect for themselves or the work they had done and been asked to do before. But the hardest group is that 60% that are going to be on the fence, the watchful ones, the ones that are waiting, let me just wait and see. And you have to really be prepared to educate them, to teach them, to give them every opportunity to embrace this new culture that you want them to work with. Use your 20%. I mean, I view them as the disciples, if you will. I mean, they're the ones that, they can go out and live this just as strongly as you believe it. And so, they're going to be a key tool in how you begin to sway the other 60%. But you have to recognize that you're going to have a program of education that you can begin to roll out for your staff. And it needs to be ongoing. It just really can't be a thought that I do this once. We have the series of corporate meetings, and now everybody gets this. This really has to be an education process that is ongoing. We couched it here as a leadership series around our culture. We run it to this day. I mean, this happened back in 2001, as Brian pointed out, but to this day, we have ongoing updates to our culture and the skills that you need to practice and embrace to make it happen for you as an employee. When I first took over, one of my first meetings after the survey results were introduced was, of course, the wonderful person, and she was one of my 20% that was with me from the beginning, who asked, wouldn't it be easier to just fire us all and start over? And answer is yes, that would be easier, but not practical in today's environment. I mean, you all know, I don't need to tell you, there's huge costs in recruitment, taking people who have skills and knowledge, program level knowledge and information, and then starting all over with that. So it wasn't, it could have been easier from a cultural perspective, but it certainly would have been the most cost-effective strategy in order to change this culture. It does require some measure of patience, and it does relate to my 60% on the fence and how you have to approach them. I think that as a leader, though, this doesn't happen overnight. And if your expectation is that it will, then I think it's something that could be your downfall, because what will happen is you'll have a tendency to believe it's just strategies you implement and then you walk away from. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the nurturing of a culture, but patience is absolutely critical. Have reasonable expectations. To change any culture, and this one was critical to us, you have to begin to change the rewards that are associated with it. So go back to what I was saying to you before. Let's take salary administration, for instance. If all that got you noticed from a salary perspective was the people that you supervised, then I had to have a salary administration that moved away from that and put much more emphasis on learning, on teamwork, on customer focus. If I wanted to have a system of evaluation that was going to reward for this culture, then I had to start doing 360s with my staff. They had to begin to start asking their peers, because that's critical in the involvement area of making sure that what one part of the organization is doing, the other part is aware of. In addition, the old evaluation system was clearly just sit down with the person above you, and as long as they're happy, we're happy. Well, in this culture, it requires greater expectations around happiness than just the box above you. It requires really satisfaction from customers. It requires satisfaction from peers. It requires satisfaction from those that are engaged and involved in your mission. So we had to completely redo that evaluation system. You have to look at your own culture, see what you're rewarding now, and understand that if you want a sea change and you want that to happen in that 2 to 3 year framework, those rewards have to be identified and changed right from the start. And then the last thing I want to comment on here around shifting a culture is this is what I was really alluding to when I started, but not quite as stated that bluntly. But this might have started with me, but the quicker it can be owned by others, the better. And Brian is going to share with you here in a minute a survey that we just conducted in 2010. And I will tell you now, my staff, they want to know, how do we make sure if you're not here, this culture can continue? Well, what a difference from back in 1999 when they were using that as the excuse for why the culture wasn't strong. My staff believe this culture is theirs. They protect it. They try and teach their new colleagues about it and what it means to function within it. And I think one of the proudest things for me now, looking back after 11 years, is that it's not my culture anymore. It really is theirs. And if anybody even starts to talk about something that they think chips away at how strongly our beliefs are in those 12 different segments of performance, they can get pretty riled up about that. And interestingly enough, and I think you're going to share this, Brian, in a minute, even as we start to kind of process results with them, we found some interesting dichotomies around their perception of some of the questions they were asked, right?
That's correct, and I think so. So as Cindy mentioned, I had the pleasure just 3 weeks ago. I was there with her and her staff and her leaders in Pennsylvania to go through their most recent results, and we'll share those with you now. So this is May of 2010. They've done the survey a number of times through the years, and these were the results I got to unveil to Cindy and her team, and as part of that process, always have an opportunity then to invite staff in and share the results with them without the leadership team present, which is kind of an interesting process, is that typically Cindy and her team will look at the results together, but then I have an opportunity to share the results with the larger staff without the leadership team present to explore, to share, to seek better understanding, to get their feedback, their comments, etc. And I can talk for a moment about that, but I thought I'd let you, Cindy, first maybe just make a couple of comments about your reactions to this year's results.
Okay, will do, Brian. I mean, I think for us, there is, what was interesting to us, and it was we did do some data sets that I think helped for us to kind of better understand where some of the concerns were coming from. And I think that's the part of the beauty of the Denison survey. I mean, the consultants are great guides because you don't want data that is really meaningless. It's just fun to look at. But I think if you can really get to data sets that drive some strategies going forward, and with ours, we really were interested in how folks new to our organization. Because one thing that we have been told is when you have a strong culture, people who are hired into it can clearly feel out of step if you haven't been careful about training them to the cultural expectations that you have. And I was very pleased in our results to see where folks who have been hired recently did not at all score drastically different from folks who had been here a longer time. And that spoke to me of a strong orientation program. We have a mentoring program. We have taken a lot of steps to make sure those people are in place. I think the other thing that was interesting for me was as we looked at some of the goals and objectives area and where that's kind of fallen down, we weren't surprised. I mean, that's the other thing that I liked about our results, is that we saw results that were reflective. if Brian would have sat down with us pre-survey and said, can you tell me some areas of your organization that you feel has eroded over the last couple of years, I think these are two areas that we might have pointed to. But the challenge in this survey that just keeps us, I guess, so hooked in, and Brian, you said it before, is the balance that needs to be maintained. Because while you're scoring numbers off the charts in involvement, it's dragging down those areas around mission, and as you're seeing numbers in the 95 percentile around creating change in organizational learning, well, consistency has to give. So I think that for us, what keeps me and my leadership team really energized about strategies is how you keep this culture alive, really thriving, but balanced. And it'll have some challenge for us going forward.
Sure. Yeah, I think and that one of the challenges that I often share with organizations is that is indeed the challenge, which is the high-performing organizations have figured out how to manage those sort of dynamic tensions that exist between having a clear sense of where you want to go, but bringing employees along and having them involved in getting there, being able to adapt and change to the world around them while maintaining some element of consistency, predictability, stability in the way that they do business. I'll just say really quickly that the staff, when I met with the staff to look at these results, they were not surprised by the findings. They thought it was an accurate reflection of the organization. I think the thing that stood out the most for me was the fact that they did own the culture. When we saw the shift from 99 to 2001, I think people thought that that was Cindy, and that was Cindy's influence and the impact that Cindy had on the organization. And so while there was great progress, there was still some underlying assumptions that the culture was the leader's culture. Certainly did not get that sense at all. All of the conversations that the staff had with me that day were about us, we, our culture, what we've created, and nobody talked about it as Cindy's culture anymore. So I know in a little bit here we want to be able to get to and talk to a few questions that people have been sending in. But I want to make sure that we talk about a couple of more things. One of those is that we always say getting more color and higher scores is nice, but that ultimately it's about the performance of the organization. And so at this point I'm going to ask Cindy to share a little bit more with us about some of the benefits that you believe this culture change has benefited or how it's benefited the Family Health Council.
Thanks, Brian. Well, in our world, as I was talking about when we first started, I mean, for us, success is really measured by the number of clients we're able to serve, the amount of public trust we're able to garner, which represents then different contracts, total amount of money received, and you can see here, it was all positive news. And the only point I want to touch on is from a cost-effective perspective, which is what any board of directors, investors, shareholders, what they're ultimately interested in is how you have that kind of growth in the most cost-effective way. And so the number to me that is the most striking is that I went from 56 employees in '99 to 63 employees in the most recent year. And we're managing double the money, double the clients, double the providers within our subcontractor network, and double the programs without doubling the staff. So for me, that is the evidence that my board needed to be able to say, yes, we continue to support your working in this culture and fostering this culture and measuring this culture.
And going from the 99 to 2001 results, I think certainly does require a lot of hard work and energy. And I think, as you started to allude to earlier, Cindy, that sustaining high performance requires quite a bit of time, energy, and effort as well. And so maybe you can talk a little bit to us about that sustaining piece of it.
Well, I'm going to start with my last point first, Brian, and that is there is no end to this transformation. Culture transformation isn't a beginning and an end. It's a journey. And so beginning to embrace that every time you do this survey, you're going to have strategies that you need to focus on, and we're past the low-hanging fruit now. Now you get a survey results, and we have to really go to focus strategies. We can't just pick a large area like mission and take a couple steps. So the work becomes more challenging, even though some of the earlier points that I was making, they have eased. But now the challenge of keeping this real and alive and focusing your efforts where the survey and the data really drive you is critically important. I think for me, just a couple things I would like to highlight. It is, at some point, you have to be able to begin to focus on your leadership. As I said, they are important partners in this transition, and Denison does have a great tool where you can assess the culture from a leader's perspective, your ability to lead a staff towards this culture shift. And we found that extremely helpful, gave us some very good personal goals. These are not organizational areas of focus, but personal goals that we could tackle to make us stronger leaders. I already mentioned recruitment and orientation, but I will just touch on it again. We quickly, I'm going to say, well, not quickly, but about 5 years ago, the realization dawned on us that we had to quit hiring to the technical. We were finding technically expert people in our programs, and they would come in here and had no clue about the culture. So we made a shift, and we are much more inclined to hire a cultural fit and teach them the technical than the other way around. And in fact, I keep hounding Brian for some sort of recruitment tool that could be utilized to even see if there's a way to measure people's willingness to embrace the culture elements that are required. So again, these are just bullet points that represent the message I want to deliver, is that is a work in progress. It is so critical to embrace that and understand that.
And I think one of the things that I know that you've done and has helped in terms of that recruitment process is using the culture model and the results that you have to help people understand the kind of culture that they're moving into. And of course, obviously, we see some of our clients who have very strong profiles much more willing to share that result with incoming employees and say, this is the kind of culture that you're coming into. But I think it's a great way to help them see in sort of living color, if you will, the strength of the culture, and allows you to, I know, ask some questions about goal setting, about teamwork, about working with others across the organization, customers, et cetera, that does inform some of your decisions in terms of hiring. And I think the last piece here is, where do we go from here? I know there's still a lot on your plate. I know there's still a lot of things that you're thinking about. Maybe you can talk about one or two of those items.
Well, the one I've highlighted, which is, I'm still a very young thing, as you know, Brian, but I am starting to think about retirement in a couple years. And succession planning is critical in that. The last thing I want is to have the next group of people in here, thinking where did the driver for this culture come from. And so succession planning for me is really a purposeful approach to seeing where the young leaders rest in this organization and beginning to build them now. Because it's not just me. It is a critically important, as I said, leadership team. And we're all going to probably be retiring within the same 5 to 6 year time frame. I want to populate my table now with who that team is going to be. I don't want to leave that for chance. I think that my lasting legacy to Family Health Council is truly going to be how to sustain all that we've accomplished. And I think the other points on here are just, these bullet points would shift from year to year, and I'm sure your businesses are all the same. I mean, the challenges are never ending. They're coming at us rapid fire. And so to have some confidence that you have a culture that can embrace the next new regulation, the next new law, the next new really trend, the next new expectation of your customers is what's most important about this list that I've put together. I don't have anything on there that I look at and think this could be our undoing. only because of the confidence I have in a culture that embraces change, embraces flexibility, embraces the need to respond to the customer. It's going to keep us critically relevant for many years to come. I'm confident of that.
Well, I often say that we at Denison, we are fortunate. We learn as much from our clients as I think they learn from us, and I've certainly had the pleasure of knowing and working with you, Cindy, for nearly 20 years now, even though you are still a relatively young thing. And for the people who are listening, what I want you to know, that Cindy, from my perspective, does exemplify sort of that level 5 leader that Jim Collins often talks about, somebody who's extremely smart, extremely dedicated, focused, but also very self-aware and humble, always seeking to learn and improve. And at Denison, we certainly thank you for allowing us to join you on this leadership transition and cultural transformation journey. So I know we've got just a little bit of time left, and I'm sure Karen has some questions that have come in that people would love to get some of your thoughts on. So Karen, what questions do we have for Cindy?
Thank you, Brian. We have quite a few that have come in. I want to start 2001. We had a lot of questions come in for that period. One question would be, when you did those surveys, did you only look at the organization as a whole, or did you also break it into some of the different segments? And were there any variations between the different groups that you looked at?
Yeah, that's a great question. In 1999, we really didn't know what the data set should be. So for me, it was trying to get some sense of where were the disconnects. So I remember clearly, Brian, at that time, we did even some surveys of our customers. So we wanted to see what was the board's perception of our culture, what was the provider's perception of the culture, what was the staff's perception. And interestingly enough, except the board had a little higher opinion, but the provider, the customer, and the staff came out almost identical in their view of the culture. When we moved to 2001, we didn't see as much need to have those other the outside input. There we decided it was much more critical to get into some subsets of the staff. I have remote staff. I have some direct service sites working in geographies apart from what's considered our headquarters. So we wanted to see how much was the culture actually transversing the miles, if you want to think about that. So we did some look at whether or not that was really happening. But Brian, I'm going to let you, I'll just share my perception, but let you certainly chime in as the expert. Honestly, the data sets in my mind don't ultimately affect strongly the overall results. And I only say that, I mean, it's intriguing and it does help with some strategy as you move forward, but the survey result that we ultimately focus on is the overall organization.
Right, and here is one of those areas where I think the size of the organization can have a big influence, because if you're talking about thousands of organizations across dozens or hundreds or more locations, then sometimes you'll see a lot more variance across an organization. I mean, one of the things we learned pretty quickly at the Family Health Council is we did not see a lot of variation within the organization. Some of that, the variation we did see was driven by distance from the home office. But I know the focus for Cindy from day one was really how do we create, I mean, one of the issues from the very beginning was how do we break down the silos and create a common sense of identity in the organization. And when you're trying to do that, the more you can focus on what do we need to do in common across the organization, the more effectively and quickly you'll get there.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Along that same time period, when you received the 2001 results, and there was such a dramatic difference between set 1 and set 2, Was there any, I guess, skepticism or disbelief among either the leadership team or the staff members about the dramatic change, or did they accept it and embrace it?
I think there was a huge sigh of relief. I mean, we felt like we had been working so hard. We were so nervous. I mean, I remember, I think Brian almost had to talk me down off the cliff, you know, when he was ready to send me the results. It was really, in all honesty, I don't recall that there was any skepticism. I think there was just total appreciation of all the hard work that everybody had been part of. And so I think that moved us quickly past disbelief. But Brian, I don't know if you're remembering anything from your debrief of staff at that point in time.
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. I mean, I do recall a great sense of relief. I mean, I think anytime a group of people work hard together to try to accomplish something and can see it sort of presented back to them in a way that acknowledges and reinforces the time and energy that they had put into it, I think it was a huge sense of relief and also a real sense of accomplishment that was felt by people. I think the next one, and we didn't have time today to go through all of the results, but the one after that, where there was pretty much full color in the profile, was probably the one that was met with the most, and I don't know that skepticism is the right word. I think concern is the word, which was kind of interesting because, you know, we had kind of reached that full color, full balance profile, and the concern that was raised by employees at that point, now we're like 4 years into the journey, the concern was that leadership will become complacent, that they will kind of check culture off and say, okay, been there, done that, we've got that accomplished, now we can turn our sights in some other directions. And, you know, Cindy has talked very eloquently about that it's a journey, that it's not something that you can accomplish and just check off your list.
Thank you. This is more of a comment, actually, and I wondered if either of you have a reaction to it. It's in today's world, in the demands of today's strategies should be developed to bring about change in 2 years. Organizations and cultures and customers don't have more than 2 years anymore. Do you find that is true at this point in organizations?
Cindy, do you want to comment on that one, or should I take that one?
Well, why don't you take it, Brian? You work with more. Then maybe I can bring it down to a more focused answer.
Sure. Yeah, one thing we have noticed, and we've had lots of conversations in Denison about this over the last few months, is that in the last couple of years, certainly in the economic times that we've been living in, the horizon seems to be getting shorter for folks. They're thinking months out, not years out. In a lot of cases, although as we've been trying to research and study what we're seeing with respect to culture in organizations over the last few years, the interesting thing that we're finding is that it's not like everybody has become short-term focused in the last 2 years. It's not like everybody's cultural results have gotten worse in the last 2 years. And in fact, you know, the organizations who thought culture was important often think culture is at least as important, if not more important, as they're trying to work through and navigate through these difficult times. And I think, you know, you talked about that, Cindy, and in that, you know, when you look at the challenges that lie ahead, and those challenges are coming fast and furious. They're not, you know, 5 years out, 10 years out. They're happening today as we speak. The one thing that does help you feel confident in your organization's ability to address those challenges is having a culture that is adaptive, that understands how they need to work together to accomplish things, that can set goals and objectives and accomplish those. So that's been our experience, is that those people who are who believe culture is important continue to think culture is important, and those people who maybe in the past were inclined to take their eye off of culture and see it as more of a long-term investment are maybe a little bit more inclined to do that today, but they do that at their own peril.
The only thing I would add, Brian, to that, from my perspective, is just to say, you know, whoever's comment that was, absolutely right on. I mean, we've moved away from even I mean, strategic planning isn't even anything that we document more than a year out. We do a year at a time. We have longer goals, but operationally 1 year segments. But to me, it's almost as though your culture becomes your constant, and I think that's really just upside down from 10 years ago. And so that is the one thing that you hold on to while your business environment, you're continually needing to shift and adapt to that. You know, these surveys are a measurement in time. They're just a snapshot. And for me, the day I walked in and said, look, here are the 12 areas we aspire to be a high-performing company, that's when the shift started. And as I said, I think what I love about it now is it's become more the constant in our life than the thing that is forever changing.
Well said.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with that, we are at the top of the hour. So I don't think we can take any more questions at this point.
No, and you know, so once again, let me just step in and thank Cindy once again for your time today, and thanks to all of our attendees who took time out of their busy schedules to join us as well. And Karen, perhaps maybe there's just a couple of things regarding some coming attractions that you want to share before we sign off.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Cindy and Brian, both for joining us. If any of you out there listening are interested in learning more, please give us a call and we will put you in contact with the right people. I want to wish everyone a happy July and let you know that we are taking our summer break from our webinar series in July, but we will return on August 25th with a spotlight webinar on our research department. We're going to explore some of our new research coming out and talk about some of the research capabilities that we have here at Denison. And then in September, on September 23rd, we're going to be joined by Karen Jones of the National Health Service of the United Kingdom, talking about culture change within that organization. We'll send you more information on those, and you can always visit our website to learn more. We really appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today, and again, thank you, Brian and Cindy. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day, everybody.